Well, ladies and gents, we are finally here! We've went through 9 consoles, and at long last, I'd reached the last hurrah. The PS3 and 4 combined just merged into my memory, and were the final stretches of my gaming journey. As stated in my NES games, I hardly got into the 8th generation, as the AAA games were becoming monotonous, and the late 2010s was the early time for wokeness, greed, and even lacking exclusives. Nonetheless, these 2 consoles just barely crossed the finish line, as there were several other games I was into, and thus they became series finales to me. Sony gave me the sayonara. Let's conclude this console crusade. Landing at the last top 10 of my video game odyssey is Lollipop Chainsaw. It barely made the cutting board, and I was hesitant on trying on account of the maid's attire, and the fact it shares a similar vibe to GTA meets zombie flicks. Ick! It even almost felt like a sort of Rumble Roses clone. I can't believe the perverted James Gunn's involved in this. We play as a high school cheerleader turned zombie leader Juliet Starling, who just turned 18 and was about to meet her crush, Nick Carlisle, until there was a zombie outbreak at the fictional San Romero High School in California. Unfortunately, he was already bitten by one, and so she literally uses her signature chainsaw to decapitate him and prevent him from churning, which somehow he's still alive as she performs some magic ritual. And thus he becomes her mentor on her war against the undead. By the way, this is like a ripoff of Supernatural, another WB property, since she and her family are zombie hunters with a more satirical tone. Just like with GTA, Ratchet, and other Sony properties, it is indeed a hack and slash, though the gameplay itself can be a bit grindy, and the sex appeal can drive people away. The only thing that got me intrigued was the group of hierarch undead known as the Dark Purveyors, a group of revenants possessing exceptional punk rock sonokinesis, along with other types of dark magic, aside from the usual zombifying. I mostly like their uniqueness compared to other various media. Just like with warm bodies, it's always best to break the toxic mold. There was a remastered version named Lollipop Chainsaw Repop just 12 years later, so that seemed decent enough. And it was hardly noticeable, but Mortal Kombat's Chaos Reigns ripped off the final boss battle for its own finale. Not that that's saying much. Fuck you, Woker Bros, and your piss-poor development! I kinda wish Cassie would cosplay as Juliet Starling, aside from Harley Quinn, though. So too that the Dark Purveyors were chosen as DLC for the previous entries. Corporate cheapskates. Believe it or not, I don't think I discovered this from my ex-step-bros, but rather from a distant friend of mine who decided to use Lewis Legend as an F-Zero pilot. And since the zombies rocked instead of being cliched undead, it piqued my curiosity. So thank you, Buttscotch. I've went through this once, and I hope the remastered version would be more appealing and less mundane and jarring. But with Woker Bros' business practices, I can't make any promises. I was skeptical on trying another Family Guy game, on account on Peter turning into a retarded, axe-crazy sadist, Lois is a lustful demon, and all their polarizing characters and psychotic jokes. But in spirit of fairness, I decided to give it a chance, on account that only Stewie's in this. In the end, I was kind of glad I actually did this. Just like the PS2 game though, it's packed with a lot of Easter eggs, such as the usual cutaway gags, Bertram's army consisting of Ernie the abusive chicken, the disfigured elves of Road to the North Pole, Evil Stewie, and so on. I'm hardly into any of the multi-universal convoluted cesspools, but this barely made the cut. Mostly on account on Stewie as the primary anti-hero, with Brian of course. And that Bertram is his arch-rival like last time. And there are also either cooperative and competitive multiplayer. Besides, I hadn't seen friendly co-op in eons, like with Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks, or even as far back as Sonic 2. So this was definitely a treat, and sometimes you can play as other characters in minor roles. But it's so low since it doesn't seem as engaging as its PS2 predecessor. It was prone to negativity, even upon its initial release. People keep saying the shooting mostly is like watching paint dry and would rather watch the show, or that it's just bland but still enjoyable, though not enough to knock your socks off. I slightly agree on these criticisms, and I felt the PS2 predecessor was a lot more fun, despite the Stewie sessions being my favorite. And being that multiverses are complicated, and the game has very sluggish pacing, I was a bit bummed at the end. My expectations were low, then drove me to a grind. I never touched another Family Guy game after that. I won't recommend it. Definitely didn't miss very much. Spider-Man Web of Shadows was an interesting encounter. Back then I hardly gave a damn about Marvel, as it merged with Disney, which was the stupidest decision the Democratic Empire has ever made. By then, Iron Man pioneered the MCU, which I hardly gave half a shit about due to its fabulous convolutions. But Web of Shadows was a brief exception. Once fascinated me by Clement before he became a greedy Trudeau lover, I was compelled. We of course play as Peter Parker, but just like in the third Tobey film, he's again infected by the symbiote, which allows him to embrace his dark side once again. However, as the player, we're always smack dab on whether we should stay heroic or embrace this new darkness. This was an experiment to another contender. For me, though, I kind of felt the dark side was a lot more interesting, cause, let's face it, we all know on Peter's heroism, but it sorta gets cliched and predictable. So why not have some fun with a rare opportunity? As someone who altered my Mortal Kombat OC who also succumbed to the captivating thrall, I first played as shadowy Spidey. And goddamn, it was indeed enthralling. And the villains that are summoned are more interesting than the heroes such as Vulture, and one of my favorite animals, Rhino. I'm not into tanks, but it was interesting how Dark Spidey's a brute, while the usual hero's speedy, whereas the civilians worship him compared to cowering away. It is an open world, but I mostly stick with the main Omnipotent campaign. And I was just in it for the thrills rather than positive character development. It was weird, but I guess like Bender said,
being bad feels pretty good, huh?
I was very fascinated on the concepts of what started to be a trilogy. Darksiders was a very intriguing find, especially since I wasn't expecting the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse to be like anti-heroes. As a fan of the Sleepy Hollow TV series dubbed as Sleepyheads, I was not expecting them to be developed and redeemable. The story goes that the balance of life has been severed by a century-long apocalypse, and the Horseman of War was labeled as the culprit by the Council. And so the first game revolves around its redemption, and dare I say, the Horsemen themselves go through quite a huge steroid dose of character development, where those such as Sleepy Hollow, X-Men, and especially Supernatural just pick a vessel and drop it from there most of the time. War's mission is to bring peace, primarily to himself to claim innocence. The second game focuses on his brother Death, whose mission is to help War erase his crimes that framed him, and even resurrect mankind that has perished in the end of days. And the third installment, parallel to the sequels of course, revolve around Fury, who's to capture and eliminate the escaped 7 deadly sins. The series soon had a spin-off, Darksiders Genesis, which involves the last Horseman, Strife, whose objective is to eliminate mankind's crimes manifested by Lucifer. Apparently that seems to be the common theme in this series, the devil manipulating and pulling the quartet strings behind the scenes. I hope this won't be a foreshadowing with Demoncrat assimilated territories. At one time I encountered an OC during one of those Twitter roleplays I used to be in. I miss some of their members, especially those that acted as Sindel, Kung Lao, and another who kept changing, but my fondness was for Baraka and Lord Liu Kang. But Valor was a random choice, even though she first started as a part of Sindel's family tree, and is always a bestie to Fury. The series was a bucket list item of mine, and I hope I'll eventually complete it soon if I should make the time for it. If only my countdowns and editing wikis wouldn't keep interfering, or mundane sluggish pacing of series won't keep burning me out. I hope I'll be prepared enough before Darksiders 4 should be released. Remember when I'd said on my PS2 games list there'd be a Dragon Ball contender later on?
Later. Much later.
Well, here we are. Dragon Ball Z Kakarot was a bit of a difficult pill to swallow, and just like others on this list, I never had the chance to encounter them until I finally left my deprived life ruled over by my stepmom and her blindly loyal sons. Anyway, I was intrigued it had more of an adventurous feel compared to Budokai, more so like an action RPG, in which it entails all the sagas from Saiyan to Buu all in one package. Finally! No more obsolete incompletion! Nor repetition like with Xenoverse and Fighter Z. This was the last hurrah of the video game series and the anime series itself, and I was glad that it literally has every scenario playable, even from different perspectives. Even more interesting was that it features the Funimation voice cast, specifically from Kai, which I thought it used to be nails on a chalkboard. But they and even Gohan sound really decent. It follows nearly the same way as the show, from the Saiyan Saga to Namek, Android, and also including the Boo Saga. And we too can get bonus stories via DLC from the TV specials, the OG series, Daima, and Super. It has an exceptional base roster with Goku, Gohan, Piccolo, Vegeta, and even future Trunks, Gotenks, and Vegito. While also several unlockables such as Goten, Kid Trunks, Yamcha, Tien, Chaozu, Krillin, and 18. Gameplay is immersive, animation is flawless, and the RPG elements can be a bit tumultuous. I think I first discovered this via Twitter as dedication to Akira or something. The reason it hardly made it to the top 5 was RPGs and I hardly get along. It is nice to do side missions to advance the plot and characters, but grinding and knowing what to do and where to go can be a very monotonous and hefty chore. The game's engine is roughly based on the legacy of Goku games for the GBA, which I never cared for. It's best to have a guide handy, but it's still a concise, convenient way to get through the show without the fattening filler. By the time I was able to finally see and complete the Boo Saga, and after I'd done the Bouncer tetralogy, I pretty much burnt myself out, and I never went on to Super nor Daima. Everyone has their limits and place and time when to drop out, including anime. All good things must come to an end. And with its outstanding presentations, talented performances, interesting extras, and functions as an extraordinary journey, I'm so thrilled that DBZ Kakarot delivers on all fronts. As stated previously, DuckTales Remastered just made the brand as smooth as butter. This remake and reboot from the Capcom NES original was just the best thing Disney has concocted, even during its era of assimilation. Same case with comparing the NES Mario trilogy to All-Stars. It had a ton of advancements. They were so lucky as Disney managed to get all the old voice cast back, since every line is audio dialogue, even before Alan Young as Scrooge passed. Rest in peace. I'm not counting the retooled animated series, as I only care just for the Sony revamp though. The animation is also greatly enhanced, with 3D backgrounds and also staying true with the 2D models. Despite the expansions on the story itself, as Scrooge begins globetrotting with his Duck Squad. And lest we forget the music, despite the fact you can still change it to the 8-bit originals once the game's beaten. Maybe I'd include Jake Kaufman as a favorite composer since he literally envisioned the soundtrack since he was a tween and naturally molded them. That's genuine talent. And the Easter eggs are just as astronomical as the coins in Scrooge's coin pen, which is a primary objective aside from searching the sacred treasure and defending his #1 dime. It keeps all the nostalgia and references intact from its 23-year-old grandpappy and excels on it with their exquisite presentation that it even exceeds it, even broadening the toughest level, Mount Vesuvius, plus having my curiosity piqued at times.
Mount Vesuvius. For real.
I love how games reinvent themselves without alienating so much from their groundbreaking material. I wasn't much of a DuckTales fan, but this game alone was a hell of a lot simpler and entertaining than the pixelated predecessor. And it definitely wasn't the first, considering we got Castle of Illusions, also developed by Capcom, less than a month from DuckTales' release. Disney and Sony were on fire releasing these advanced classics. I wish that Quackshot had that same tribute. Dante's Inferno was just a reprieve for me, especially since everyone and their brother would rather prefer the Dante from the Devil May Cry series. Rebooted timeline or not. Anyway, despite 90% of consumers think it's a lousy rehash of the original Divine Comedy's journey through hell, I never felt this way. This whole intrigue started back in 2010 when a hothead creator said that Kefka's final battle was based on the Divine Comedy. I became curious, and by then, I first stumbled upon the animated epic. It was gory and sometimes erotic, but I was also a sleepyhead, so I kind of felt right at home. The game was a bit more tumultuous, exploring each of the 9 rings of the Netherrealm, especially with the confusing layout inside the Cerberus, or knowing which souls to purify with the Sacred Holy Cross, courtesy of Infernopedia to make things easier. I think it functions similar to the City of Final Fantasy, performing combos and magic, leveling up and collecting items on your journey to save Beatrice, aside from gimmicky QuickTime events, which PS3 and 4 games abuse the blood out of. At least it's not as vindictive as the oversaturating Resident Evil. Still, I feel the journey's more important than the goal on Dante's redemption. And it can just be a cautionary tale if we would be sin. It's too bad those greedy bastards in EA never continued the trilogy. But at least it provided the animated epic as a freebie, as well as excellent material to work with during the climax of my own version of Season 5 in Sleepy Hollow. I even written on that first! Just know that it's definitely not for the faint of heart, and sometimes God of War clones can turn out better than these counterparts, like Kefka vs. Joker. It's still an educational, edgy, and haunting, daunting ride. I'd highly recommend it to anyone if they want to learn about the Damned Realm, and how to avoid it, thus taking the 4th spot. Taking the bronze medal is the 25th anniversary homage of the Sonic series, Sonic Mania. This was just a breather from the convoluted titles and is a return to basics, as Team Sonic goes through nostalgic zones and do the usual deeds, saving Angel Island at Robotnik's upteenth attempt at invasion after Sonic 3 and Knuckles while collecting Chaos Emeralds through trippy special stages, or even sometimes racing against each other on the side. This game was primarily a tribute to the Genesis games we all know and love, and I'm very happy they paid tribute to the good old days, like Final Fantasy IX as the last hurrah to classic Final Fantasy. Without the cheesiness in New Super Mario Bros. Thanks Sega. It was kind of the final stretch for me in the Speedy franchise, and I've yet to discover Sonic Frontiers. I didn't even mind about the overused zones such as Green Hill, Chemical Plant, and even Oil Ocean got a second shot. Each zone regardless was exhilarating, and I never cared there were hardly any newer ones. Sonic's been around for a quarter of a century back in 2017 after all. God, why is that year so common? To add to the sweetness, there's been some okay rearrangements of the music, as well as extra cutscenes in between. Heck, it even gave the unsung duo Mighty the Armadillo and Bray the Flying Squirrel second chance to shine after their abandoned arcade debut. That is respect, especially to veteran fans. A giant leap from the retarded Sonic 06 for the 15th anniversary, that's for true. Only to resurface in another promising franchise. If there's any PS3 or 4 game I'd welcome novices and hardcore fans, Sonic Mania's the real deal. Oh yeah, and to avoid Sonic Origins like the COVID plague. For second place, the PS3 and 4 can't be complete without mentioning Mortal Kombat. No different than with Nintendo not having either Mario or Pokemon. There was a very shaky history and faith with the series, as I dropped out twice in a row involving this console. A few months after the rush job known as MK Armageddon, the console was released, and NRS took over after the DC crossover, which took place in one of the worst fiscal years. Since then, I always utterly despised them, until I discovered the lesser of all evils, which was Mortal Kombat 11. Deal with that. This was just the roller coaster ride I was hesitant to try, and I'd heard more hate on this than with Dominic's failed experiment, hardly any slight likes. I mean, sure, there were the Towers of Time which black out constantly and even worser than Spark Mandrill's stage. There were consumables and gears which seemed inaccessible, especially when using microtransactions and dragon gems. Slow gameplay which doesn't seem as clunky as the 3D titles. The fatal blows were a drag, and the customization was bare bones compared to Injustice and Armageddon. But I was mostly in for the story. Aside on the praise from those insane fatalities and bringing friendships back, after a couple years from the events of MKX during Shinnok's downfall, as well as the undead Liu Kang and Kitana ruling the Netherrealm, time began to shift, as we're introduced to the Titaness of Time, Kronika, who's apparently the manipulator of the Pantheon, and the Manta Shinnok and Cetrion. A timequake occurred in prep of her new era, which caused both past and present heroes and villains to join the fray. It was nice seeing younger and no longer corrupt versions of combatants, especially with Lou, Kitana, and Raiden. But Dominic ain't the best writer in the world, as there were many obscure obstacles in the lore, such as not having the amulet at the Temple of Elements, and Jax going through a Revenant relapse. And it was also the first to have a sour DLC plot. At least it brought Fusion and Shang back. But it was all worthwhile when Liu got his ascension and became Earthrealm's new protector as the Chosen One. The final boss and villain has always been overhated, especially since it was a last-minute decision. But, as stated before, I never cared. It's not perfect, but I'll always consider it next to MK3 and Shaolin Monks, and the subtle negative to the NRS PS4 era. If only they would have stuck with Lutana's time to shine.
Each realm must choose its own destiny. Whatever those choices, we will face them together.
You did not disappoint.
Alright, we've delved into 9 of the PS3 and PS4 placeholders. But before we get to the final destination of my gaming journey, let's have the honorable and dishonorable mentions play. Before we get to the true finale, let me paint this picture for you. Back when Mortal Kombat shunned me with 9 and X, there was an irresistible Marvel movie on FX, known as the Guardians of the Galaxy. I was never into MCU, but it was just the only film I got myself intrigued with, as it felt quite similar to Star Fox or Fur Fighters. When I finally got the chance to see Volume 2, though, I really despised it so damned much. And I even wished for Star-Lord to be slewed, as I abhorred his obsession with Ego, and it would have been better within the Infinity War instead of Gamora.
Should have been you, Gordon.
I was very reluctant to see Volume 3, but it wasn't until I stumbled upon a hidden gem that seems to be a hell of a lot better than what the MCU can entail. That game was Guardians of the Galaxy, the Telltale series! This was the definitive installment that's brought me back to not only the Guardians series, but also the PS4 itself. As mentioned, both MK9 and X shunned me away, and it took several more years, around 2021, before I gave it another shot. It was more relieving since this was based more from the comics than the convoluted multiverse crapshoot. I've stated this several times, but basically the Guardians received word that Thanos was about to steal an artifact from the Kree ruins. After they cornered him and brought him to the Nova Corps, they encounter Hala the Accuser, who's obsessed on obtaining an omnipotent relic, the Eternity Forge, which is said to restore the dead and even give the user hallucinations of their distant past. Plus it does give Mantis a far better role. And the Guardians themselves were a lot more tolerant, entertaining, and hysterical. Like seriously, it'd be hard to put the game down. And the story's engaging thanks to functioning primarily with QuickTime events. For those unfamiliar, games within the Telltale series are very unique. The Guardians alone was the first of its kind. It does have QuickTime events built into its gameplay, and pretty much plays like an interactive novel. You still do engage mostly Star-Lord in movement, exploration, examination, and speaking with your comrades, while also having some ramifications such as Peter as a kid with his dying mom, Rocket escaping from Half-Worlds with Lyla, Gamora rivaling with Nebula, or Drax teaching his lost son. The objective is to stop Hala the Accuser, similar to Ronin, on decimating the universe by reviving her lost Kree army and her son with the all-powerful Eternity Forge. Even a brief recap of your progress after inactivity in a certain length. But enough with the basics. What makes this game number one? Well, aside from bringing me back to the PS console and giving Volume 3 a chance, the gameplay is simplistic. I never cared about for each chapter to unlock since I'd arrived very late. And it's very interesting on how your choices of dialogue dictates where the plot goes. Even though it was released a decade apart from Mass Effect, I'll still consider it over that. In addition, there are a lot of bangers of oldies within the soundtrack, aside from the original score. Like any of Sony's 8th generation, the graphics and audio are exquisite, almost photorealistic. The story may get a bit tedious and would take a while to get the gist, but the action is very addictive and fast-paced. A lot of world building and plot development that not even a single movie can handle. And once Hala's out of the picture, the results are just incredibly satisfying. And since then, Rocket and Groot quickly became my all-time favorite Guardians, with Hala as an interesting villain. It was also exhilarating that it centered around the relationships between the Guardians, instead of an origin story, and it was one of Telltale's last projects before going into bankruptcy, which is why it's rare to find a physical copy and instead resort to emulation or Steam. Lastly, I just want to point out a very personal truth. By 2017, my dad had to shut down his last mom-and-pop shop ever, known as Player's Choice Emporium, due to the corrupt town governor on passing customer information to third-party sources in Florida and even to China. Funny enough, the neighboring Italian restaurant expanded once the final electric playground shut down. So that was so damned convenient. But from my personal experience, this was the last hurrah of gaming for me. Hobbies had changed tenfold since 2010 once I got acquainted with Let's Plays, countdowns, and even fanfiction or editing wikis. Gaming started to become less and less interesting as the generations rolled on, and I never cared beyond this point. I still got some bucket lists, but it never reached beyond the PS3 and 4. And modern media, along with the sort of existential crises I had when I first turned 30, was just the nail in the coffin. I dropped out of the trendy scene, and I've been full-blown retro ever since. I'm the Ekron writer, and both the Telltale series and the PS4 were the final hurdles of my gaming odyssey. Nostalgic gaming defines who we are and where we stand in this pesky algorithm-eating society. We aren't nostalgically blind, we just have limits. And we know when to quit a vice or two, which is something the nostalgically immune lack. From the 8-bit era to the 8th generation, these console games and lists shall remain constant. We all have a beginning, middle, and end to all our lives and our hobbies. And the PS4 was the finish line. Thank you for shaping me to who I am and for all the nostalgia that these consoles bring.